My name is Serena Calloway. I am 34 years old, and on the night my daughter was born, the night a surgeon cut her out of my body at 9:47 in the evening, because her heart rate had dropped to a place that frightened every nurse in the room, the two people I had called first, the two people whose numbers I had dialed the moment the doctor looked at me and used the words emergency cesarean, were sitting inside a rented event space in Scottsdale, Arizona, toasting my brother with a glass of champagne. My mother had her phone on silent. My father had his in his jacket pocket and felt it buzz and put it back without looking at it. My daughter was born weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces, with the cord wrapped once around her neck, and the first person to hold her, after the surgical team, was a labor and delivery nurse named Patrice, who had been a stranger to me 4 hours earlier. I named my daughter Margaret, after my grandfather. What my parents did not know, what no one in my family except my husband Marcus and my grandfather's attorney knew, was that the moment Margaret drew her first breath, she became the sole beneficiary of a trust worth $12 million. And my parents had been planning to ask me, very gently, very lovingly, to help them access it. This is that story. Before I go any further, I need to stop and ask you something. Where are you right now? What part of the world? What time of day? Is it morning where you are? Is the coffee still hot? Or is it late at night and the house is finally yours? Drop your city and your local time in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know. These stories travel to places I would never expect, and I find that remarkable every single time. And if you connect with stories about women who were treated as afterthoughts by the people who were supposed to show up for them, and who quietly, carefully, and completely turned the table, hit like, hit subscribe, and stay with me. This one has taken me 2 years to be ready to tell, and I am going to tell every word of it. My full name is Serena Marie Calloway, born Serena Marie Dutton. I grew up in Chandler, Arizona, the first of 2 children of Dennis and Patricia Dutton. My father, Dennis, was a sales manager for a commercial HVAC company, a man who coached my brother's Little League teams and built a workshop in the garage, and told good stories at dinner, and was, by all visible measures, a good father. My mother, Patricia, ran the household, volunteered at the school, organized the neighborhood 4th of July block party every year with a level of operational precision that I genuinely admired, and loved her children in the way that certain parents love their children, completely, but not equally. I understood this before I had language for it. Children understand these calibrations early. They just do not always name them. My brother's name is Tyler James Dutton. He is 29 years old, 5 years younger than me, and he has been, for the entirety of his conscious life, the sun around which my parents orbit. I do not say this with bitterness, at least not anymore. I say it as a structural fact, the way you would describe the layout of a house. Tyler is the larger room. I am the hallway. The hallway is useful. The hallway connects things. But no one hangs art in the hallway, or installs good lighting there, or thinks about it when they are planning how to use the space. Tyler graduated from Arizona State University in May of the year my daughter was born. He completed a 4-year degree in business administration in 4.5 years, with a grade point average that my mother described, to anyone within range, as an accomplishment. Tyler is not stupid, and I want to be clear about that. He is a perfectly functional adult, with ordinary abilities and an extraordinary support system that has cushioned every difficulty of his life so thoroughly that he has never been required to develop the kind of resilience that comes from landing on the ground. He got the graduation party. I got the bus pass, to borrow a metaphor from a woman whose story I find deeply familiar. The bus pass, in my case, was the understanding, absorbed so early it felt like fact, that my needs were the ones that waited. My grandfather's name was Harold James Dutton. He was my father's father, and he was the most formative person in my life, which is a sentence I have thought about carefully and mean precisely. Harold was 81 years old at the time of this story, and had been for the preceding 7 years, in declining health in a way that was gradual and then suddenly not. He was a retired civil engineer who had built a modest fortune over 40 years through careful investment and careful living, the kind of financial discipline that people of his generation did not discuss openly because they considered it private. Harold had 4 qualities that I want you to understand clearly, because they are the architecture of everything that follows. He was observant. He was methodical. He was fair in the truest sense of that word, not equal, but proportionate, which is the more demanding version of fair. And he loved me in the specific, unhurried way that a grandparent sometimes loves a grandchild who reminds them of themselves. Harold had watched, with his precise and patient attention, the dynamics of our family for decades. He had watched Tyler receive and watched me manage. He had watched my parents calibrate their love by a formula that neither of them could have named or defended, but that operated as reliably as any equation. He had watched me graduate from Arizona State with a degree in accounting, which I had funded myself through a combination of academic scholarship, work study, and a part-time job at a tax preparation office that I held for 3 years. He had watched me build, over the following decade, a career as a forensic accountant with a mid-size firm in Phoenix. He had watched me marry Marcus Calloway, an architectural engineer from Tucson, who was quiet and capable, and the first person in my adult life who treated my needs as non-negotiable. Harold had, in the last 2 years of his clear-minded life, made certain decisions. He made them methodically, with an attorney, and he did not discuss them with my father. The trust was structured with the guidance of an estate attorney named Leonard Pratt, who had an office in Scottsdale and had managed Harold's affairs for the better part of 15 years. Leonard was, by the time I met him formally, a composed man of 63, with the kind of practiced stillness that belongs to people who have sat across from grieving families more times than they can count and have learned to hold the room. The trust Harold established was an irrevocable generation-skipping trust, a legal structure designed to pass assets directly to a grandchild or great-grandchild, bypassing the intervening generation for both tax and protective purposes. The assets were $12 million in diversified holdings. The sole named beneficiary was any child born of Serena Marie Dutton Calloway. Harold did not tell me this directly. He told me in a letter, handwritten on 3 pages of plain white paper, that I found in an envelope inside a cedar box that had lived on the shelf above his workbench for as long as I could remember. He left me the box specifically, in writing, in his will. The letter told me to contact Leonard Pratt when the time was right, and to say that Harold had sent me. He wrote it the summer before his final decline. He was 80 years old. His handwriting was still steady. I want to give you a fuller picture of Harold, because he deserves it, and because the picture matters to the story. Harold James Dutton was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 1942. He graduated from the University of New Mexico with a civil engineering degree in 1964 and spent the next 4 decades building bridges, overpasses, and water infrastructure throughout the Southwest. He was not a sentimental man in the conventional sense. He did not make speeches at Thanksgiving or send greeting cards with handwritten notes of great length. His sentimentality expressed itself in different forms. In the way he kept a record, in a leather notebook, of every conversation he considered important. In the way he took photographs at family gatherings, not of the group shots, but of the in-between moments. Someone laughing at something they'd just heard, a child looking at something on the ground, a person sitting alone with a plate of food, present in themselves. I appear in Harold's photographs with a frequency that only struck me when I was going through his things after his death. Album after album, there I am. Not centered, not posed, just seen. He was documenting something. I think I know what. He also had a habit, when I came to stay with him in summers as a child, of asking me what I thought about things. Not what I felt, but what I thought. What did I think about the best material for a footbridge in a floodplain? What did I think the population of Phoenix would be in 20 years? What did I think the family should do about a specific situation that he described with careful neutrality? He treated my answers as data. He wrote some of them in the notebook. I grew up believing that my opinions had weight, because Harold treated them as if they did. Harold passed away on a Wednesday in February, 14 months before my daughter was born. He was in the house he had lived in for 43 years, with a hospice nurse present and my father and aunt in the next room. I drove 4 hours to be there and arrived 40 minutes after he was gone, which is one of the things I will carry for the rest of my life. My father cried in the way that men of his generation cry, briefly, with the face turned slightly away. Tyler did not come. He had a spring break trip already booked. My mother explained this to the gathered family at the reception afterward, with the particular fluency she brings to the management of Tyler's reputation. I ate a plate of food I cannot remember, and drove home the same night. 3 weeks after Harold's funeral, I called Leonard Pratt. I had not yet told Marcus about the letter. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building at 6:45 in the evening with the cedar box on the passenger seat, and I made the call. Leonard answered on the second ring. He said, "Miss Calloway, I've been expecting to hear from you. Your grandfather said you'd call." I drove home and sat at the kitchen table with Marcus and told him everything. Marcus did not speak for a while. Then he said, "Your grandfather saw you clearly." That is the sentence I come back to. Your grandfather saw you clearly. We cried briefly, and then we made dinner, and then we talked for 2 more hours about what it meant and what we would do, and we decided that the only thing we would do was protect it. For the child we hoped to have, and for Harold. I want to tell you about the pregnancy, not because it requires extensive detail, but because certain things matter to what came after. I became pregnant 6 months after Harold's death. The pregnancy was not difficult in the early months, and then it was. I developed a condition called intrahepatic cholestasis in the 3rd trimester, a liver condition that creates a significant risk of stillbirth if the baby is not delivered by 37 weeks. My OB, a woman named Dr. Andrea Flores at a practice in Tempe, managed it carefully and conservatively and told me around 35 weeks that we would be scheduling an induction for week 37 at the latest, and that I should be prepared for the possibility of earlier intervention. I told my parents this. I told them plainly. I said the words high risk and stillbirth risk in the same sentence, and I watched my mother's face process the information and file it, and then redirect the conversation to Tyler's graduation party, which was 3 weeks away, and was consuming the entirety of her logistical attention. The graduation party was not a small event. My parents had rented an event space in North Scottsdale, a venue with a catering minimum and a DJ and a guest list of 64 people. They had been planning it for 4 months. Tyler's graduation was on a Friday afternoon at ASU, and the party was that same evening from 7 to 11. I was, at the time, 36 weeks and 4 days pregnant. My due date was 2 weeks and 3 days away. I had been told clearly, by Dr. Flores, that I was not to be more than 20 minutes from my hospital at any given time given the cholestasis. Scottsdale was 40 minutes from the hospital where I was to deliver. I told my parents I would not be able to attend. My mother's response, delivered by text message at 9:37 in the morning on a Tuesday, was, "Serena, we are hoping you can make it work. Tyler would really love to have the whole family there. It would mean a lot." I read that message 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. The night of Tyler's graduation party was a Saturday in May, beginning at 7 in the evening. I know the timeline of that night with the precision of someone who has revisited it many times. Marcus and I were home in our apartment in Tempe. I had been having irregular contractions since the previous afternoon, the kind that Dr. Flores had told me to monitor, but that could mean several different things at 36 weeks. By 5 in the afternoon, they had become more regular. By 6:45, they were 7 minutes apart, and I called the hospital and they told me to come in. Marcus drove. I called my mother from the car at 6:52 in the evening. Her phone went to voicemail. The voicemail greeting was her regular one. I left a message that said, "Mom, I'm in labor. We're on our way to the hospital. Please call me." I called my father at 6:54. The same result. I texted both of them. In labor. Going to the hospital. Call me. At the venue in Scottsdale, the party had been underway for approximately 1 hour. My mother's phone was on silent in her handbag. My father felt his phone buzz in his jacket pocket, checked the screen, not fully, but enough to see it was me, and put it back without opening the message. He told me this himself, later, which is an act of honesty I did not expect and have not fully processed. He said he thought it was a false alarm. He said he thought we were being cautious and would let him know if it became serious. He said he did not want to alarm your mother in the middle of Tyler's party. Those were his words. He did not want to alarm your mother. I arrived at the hospital at 7:21. My contractions were 4 minutes apart. Dr. Flores was called in. By 8:15, Margaret's heart rate had dropped. By 8:40, the room had a different quality. Focused, fast, the kind of efficient urgency that hospital staff are trained to perform without performing it. Dr. Flores looked at me and said, "Serena, we need to take her now." I said yes. Marcus held my hand until the doors of the operating room and then waited in the hallway. The nurse, named Patrice, held my hand on the other side of the curtain during the surgery. She had been working a double shift. She did not have to hold my hand. She did it because she understood that a woman giving birth in an emergency needs a hand to hold. Margaret was born at 9:47 in the evening, 6 pounds, 2 ounces. The cord was wrapped once around her neck and had been compressing with each contraction. She was blue for 11 seconds. I know, because I counted, the way you count things in moments of complete terror that your brain will not let you look away from. And then she was not blue, and she was crying, and she was here. I cried in the way I have not cried since the day Harold died. Marcus was brought in. He held Margaret and he held me, and he said something into my hair that I could not fully hear through the sobbing, but that I have assembled from memory as, "She's okay, she's here, she's okay." I want to stay with the night of Margaret's birth a little longer, because I think the story requires it. The operating room at Banner Desert Medical Center was cold in the way operating rooms always are. The anesthesiologist was a man named Dr. Kwan, who told me his name before he did anything, and asked me if I had any questions and seemed to mean it. The surgical team moved with the efficiency of people who have done this many times and for whom urgency does not require display. I was on the table at 9:31. Dr. Flores made the incision at 9:42. Margaret was delivered at 9:47. I know these times because Marcus wrote them in the Notes app on his phone from the hallway. Because he knew I would want them. Because Marcus Calloway is the kind of person who thinks about what you will want when you are not in a position to think about it yourself. The 11 seconds Margaret was blue are not something I will describe in further detail. They exist in me as a completed fact, the way certain things exist. Not as memories exactly, but as knowledge of the body. She was blue, and then she was not blue, and then she was crying. And the cry was the most specific sound I have ever heard in my life. Patrice, the nurse, said quietly beside me, "She's here, she's strong." 2 sentences. I have thought about those 2 sentences many times since. My husband came in 20 minutes after the delivery. He had been in the hallway for 46 minutes. He had called no one. He had simply stood there, because that is the kind of man he is. The kind who understands that his job in that hallway was to be there for whatever came through the door, and who does his job without requiring acknowledgement for doing it. My parents arrived at the hospital at 11:14. My mother was still in the dress she had worn to the party. There were traces of mascara on her lower lids from the crying she had done in the car on the drive over. She came into the room where I was, and she said, "Serena, my God, I'm so sorry. We didn't have our phones. We didn't know." I looked at her. I had Margaret in my arms, who was warm and small, and entirely unaware that her grandmother had been 40 minutes away at a party and had put her phone on silent. I said, "I know," and then I looked back at Margaret. That was the entire conversation. My father stood near the door. He said, "She's beautiful, Serena." I said, "Her name is Margaret." He nodded. He understood why, I think. At least the name part. The rest of it was going to take longer for everyone. If you are still with me at this point in the story, and I know this one does not hurry, I want to ask you something directly before we go any further. Have you ever been in a crisis and reached for the person who was supposed to be your first call and found the line empty? Not broken, not unavailable, just empty, because something else was more important and you were not enough of an emergency? Drop a comment below and tell me, because I think there are more of us than anyone talks about. Subscribe, because what comes next is what I spent 12 months building quietly while everyone else was busy with other things. Now, let me tell you about the trust, and about what happened when my parents found out about it. Harold's trust had been established in a form that my parents knew nothing about. My father had assumed, reasonably from his perspective, that Harold's estate would pass through a standard will, and that the assets would be distributed to Harold's 2 children, Dennis and Harold's daughter, my Aunt Carol, in some form. Harold did have a will, and it distributed his personal property, his house, and a modest savings account in the expected way. But the $12 million in investment holdings had been placed in the irrevocable trust 3 years before Harold's death, at which point they ceased to be part of his estate entirely. They were already Margaret's, legally, from the moment the trust was funded. Margaret's birth simply activated the distribution provisions. Leonard Pratt had been administering the trust quietly for 3 years. When Margaret was born, Leonard called me at 10:43 the following morning to confirm and to tell me the trust was now fully operational. He congratulated me on my daughter. He said Harold would have been very pleased. I thanked him, and I went back to watching Margaret sleep. I told Marcus that night, quietly, in the hospital room after the nurses had done their evening checks and the lights were low. He already knew the trust existed. I had told him about Harold's letter, but hearing Leonard confirm the amount made it real in a different way. Marcus sat with it for a moment and then said, "We need to protect this properly." I said, "I know." I had already scheduled a follow-up call with Leonard for the following week. I had also, in the weeks before the birth, done something that Marcus did not yet know about. I had called my own attorney, a woman named Diane Shepard, who specialized in family law and trust protection and who had been recommended to me by a colleague at my firm. I had told Diane about the trust, about my parents' financial situation as best I understood it, and about my assessment of what would happen when they found out. Diane had listened carefully and said, "Let's get ahead of this." We had spent 3 sessions in the month before Margaret was born, making sure that the trust was fully understood, fully documented, and fully protected from any angle my parents or anyone else might approach it from. The 3 sessions with Diane Shepard before Margaret's birth were among the most useful hours I have spent in the last 2 years. Diane was direct in a way I appreciate. She did not soften things or dress them in warmer language than they required. In our first session, she said, "Tell me what you expect to happen when your family finds out." I told her. She listened without expression. Then she said, "That is a reasonable assessment, and we should plan for all of it." What we planned was not combative. It was structural. We identified every legal angle from which the trust could potentially be approached and confirmed, with Leonard, that each of them was closed. We documented my competency and Marcus's competency as trustees. We established a clear protocol for communications from family members regarding the trust. All such communications were to be directed to Leonard or to Diane, not to me personally. That protocol saved me from a number of conversations that would have been emotionally taxing and legally irrelevant. It also gave me something I had not fully expected: the particular kind of freedom that comes from knowing exactly where you stand, and knowing that where you stand has been examined from every direction by someone whose job is to find the weak points. I need to tell you about my parents' financial situation because it is the engine of what happened next. My father had been passed over for a promotion at his company the previous year. He was 58 years old, and the path upward had, in the particular way of corporate paths, closed while he was not paying close enough attention. My parents owned a house in Chandler that had appreciated significantly, but that also carried a second mortgage they had taken out 5 years earlier to help fund Tyler's college years. Tyler had received no scholarship and had not been expected to fund his own education. My mother had not worked outside the home since Tyler was born. Their retirement savings were, by my forensic accountant's assessment of the information I had passively absorbed over years of family dinners and overheard phone calls, insufficient for the life they were planning to live. They were not destitute. They were not in crisis. They were in the specific position of people who had spent in one direction for decades and had arrived at a point where the numbers did not quite add up, and they were hoping something would adjust the equation. My grandfather had always been that something. Harold had helped my parents quietly and irregularly throughout my childhood and adult life. A check here, a loan that was never repaid there. Those transfers had stopped when Harold's health declined, and his finances were placed under closer management. After Harold died, the adjustments my parents had been counting on did not materialize from the will, because the will, while not nothing, distributed far less than they had assumed. The $12 million in investment assets they had perhaps been expecting to see appear in my father's inheritance did not appear. There was no explanation offered by anyone, because Leonard Pratt was not obligated to offer one and did not. It took my parents 7 months after Harold's death to begin asking questions. The questions started with my Aunt Carol, who had received the same modest inheritance and was equally surprised. Then they moved to Leonard Pratt's office directly, where they were told, professionally and completely, that the estate had been settled in accordance with Harold's instructions and that all assets had been distributed appropriately. My father understood enough about estate law to know that distributed appropriately did not necessarily mean distributed to you. He hired, briefly, his own attorney. That attorney confirmed that the irrevocable trust was fully legal, fully executed, and not subject to challenge. My father paid that attorney's fee and did not tell my mother what he had learned, which I know because Carol told me, and because my mother's behavior in the following months did not reflect any awareness that the $12 million had already been accounted for. They found out about Margaret's trust at a family lunch, 3 weeks after she was born. I did not tell them. I had decided, Diane agreed with this decision, that there was no strategic or personal benefit to volunteering the information. They found out because Tyler had been talking to one of Harold's former neighbors, a woman named Gloria, who had known Harold for 30 years and who had, in the way of certain women of a certain generation, simply said what she knew, without considering whether she should. Tyler mentioned it to my mother that same afternoon. My mother called me at 6:17 that evening. I saw her name on the screen and let it ring twice before I answered. Serena. Her voice had the quality it gets when she is doing two things at once, feeling something and deciding how to present the feeling simultaneously. Tyler talked to Gloria Perkins today. I know who Gloria is, I said. She mentioned something about Grandpa Harold and a trust. And Margaret. A pause. Is that true? Yes, I said. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted. How much? She asked. That's between me and Harold's attorney, I said. Serena, we are your parents. And this is your grandfather's money, our family's money. And if there's some kind of trust we should know about, you know about it now, I said. It's a trust for Margaret. Harold set it up. It's legal and it's settled. How Margaret uses it, when she is old enough to access it, is between Marcus and me, as her trustees, and Leonard Pratt as the estate trustee. My mother's next sentence was the one I had been waiting for, not with dread, but with the particular patience of someone who has correctly predicted something, and has spent the time since the prediction getting ready. She said, Your father and I are in a difficult position financially, Serena. We have been for a while, and your grandfather would have wanted to take care of his family. I let the sentence exist in the space between us for a moment. Then I said, Mom, Harold took care of his family. Good night. I hung up. I sat in the nursery in the dark, with Margaret sleeping in the bassinet 4 feet away. I did not feel anything in particular. I had prepared for this moment for months. Preparation is not the same as not feeling, but it does change the texture of it considerably. The campaign that followed was, I want to be precise, not aggressive. My parents were not cruel people, and they were not stupid people, and they understood, at some level, that they had not fully examined, that they had behaved in a way, on the night of Margaret's birth, that had consequences they had not anticipated. The campaign was therefore conducted in the register of love. My mother called every 3 or 4 days. The calls were warm, attentive, full of questions about Margaret, her weight, her sleep patterns, whether the breastfeeding was going well. They were also, without exception, angled. The angle was usually oblique at first. It's just so beautiful that Harold provided for the family this way. He always wanted to take care of everyone. I wonder sometimes what he would have wanted for all of us. Then, around the 4th week, the angle became less oblique. The specific conversation I am about to describe took place on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house in Chandler, 6 weeks after Margaret was born. My mother had asked us to come for lunch. Marcus and I came, because I wanted to have this conversation in person and I wanted Marcus present as a witness. My parents had also invited Tyler, which I had not been told in advance but which did not surprise me. We sat at the dining room table, my parents, Tyler, Marcus, me and Margaret, in her carrier on the seat beside me. My mother had made a full lunch. The gesture of the full lunch was itself a kind of argument. We are a family, we gather, we share a table, we should be able to discuss this as the family we are. After the food, after the conversation about Margaret's doctor appointment and Tyler's job search, my father set down his coffee cup and looked at me with the directness that comes to men like my father when they have finally decided to say a thing out loud. Serena, we need to talk about the trust. I said, all right. He said, your mother and I are not asking to take anything that isn't ours. But Harold's intention was to take care of his family, and we are in a situation where we could use some help. The house has a second mortgage that's come due for refinancing, and the terms are going to be significantly worse than what we locked in originally. If there's a way to access some portion of the trust, as a loan, as a family arrangement, anything, we want to have that conversation. He said it cleanly and without drama, which I respected. My father, when he finally decides to be direct, is capable of being quite direct. I looked at him. I looked at my mother. I looked at Tyler, who was looking at the table. Then I said the thing I had worked out with Diane and with Marcus over the previous weeks. The thing that was true and complete and did not require any performance. Dad, Harold set up an irrevocable trust. The word irrevocable is doing significant work in that sentence. The trust assets cannot be redirected, loaned, or accessed by anyone other than Margaret and her trustees, which are Marcus and me, for the purposes Harold specified. There is no legal mechanism by which the trust can be used to address your mortgage or any other family financial need. That is not a decision Marcus and I are making. That is the structure Harold built. If you have questions about the legal specifics, Leonard Pratt's number is available, and he is happy to explain it. My mother started to speak. I held up one hand. Not rudely, just to finish. I want to say one more thing, and then we can talk about something else. On the night Margaret was born, I was in an emergency cesarean at 9:47 in the evening. I had called both of you at 6:52 and 6:54. I had texted both of you. I was alone in that operating room, with Marcus in the hallway and a nurse I had met 4 hours earlier holding my hand, and you were 40 minutes away at a party. I am not telling you that to cause pain. I am telling you that because it is part of the picture of this family, and I think everyone at this table should be looking at the complete picture. No one spoke for what felt like a long time. Tyler was still looking at the table. My father's jaw worked slightly, the way it does when he is processing something he cannot immediately refute. My mother's eyes were wet. Margaret made a small sound in her carrier, the kind of sound she makes when she is almost ready to need something. I reached over and adjusted her blanket. Serena, my mother said, I am so sorry about that night. You have to know I am. I know you are sorry, I said. I believe that. But being sorry for a thing and understanding a thing are two different steps. You can take your time with the second one. My father said, we thought it was a false alarm. I know, I said. That's part of the picture too. Tyler looked up from the table for the first time. He said, I should have come to the graduation. I looked at him. Tyler is 29 years old and has the expression right now of someone who is arriving, somewhat belatedly, at a version of himself that is more honest than the one he has been operating with. Yeah, I said, you should have, but that's yours to work out, not mine. He nodded. He went back to looking at the table. I think that was the most honest exchange Tyler and I have had in 15 years, and it took approximately 22 seconds. I want to tell you what happened in the months after that Sunday lunch, because the story does not end at the table. It continues in the quieter, slower way that family stories always continue, not in dramatic revelations, but in incremental recalibrations. My parents made one more formal request, this one in writing, through an attorney they had retained briefly. The letter was professional and carefully worded and asked, on behalf of Dennis and Patricia Dutton, for a review of the trust terms to determine whether any provision existed for the benefit of direct family members in financial need. Leonard Pratt responded in writing within 2 weeks. His response was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph confirmed the trust terms. The second paragraph confirmed that no such provision existed. The third paragraph noted that Harold Dutton had, in his instructions to Leonard, specifically anticipated this type of inquiry and had asked Leonard to confirm, in writing if requested, that the trust structure was intentional and complete. Harold had written, in his own instruction to Leonard, a single sentence that Leonard quoted directly in the letter. The trust is for Margaret, and it is not to be adjusted for the convenience of anyone else. I read that sentence 6 times. It sounded exactly like Harold. It sounded like a man who had been watching his family for decades and had decided, with the full clarity of a civil engineer who has spent a lifetime understanding load-bearing structures, exactly where the weight needed to go. My parents' attorney withdrew from the matter the following week. The second mortgage on the Chandler house was refinanced at worse terms, as my father had anticipated. They are managing. They are not comfortable, but they are managing. My mother calls less frequently now, not because she loves me less, I do not think, but because the shape of the conversation has changed, and she has not yet found the right footing in the new shape. My father called me on a Tuesday in September, 3 months after the Sunday lunch, and said, "I want you to know I think Harold did the right thing." He said it plainly, with no editorial. I said, "I think so too, Dad." He said, "We'll figure the house out." I said, "I know you will." We talked for 11 minutes about Margaret, and about his workshop, and about a repair he was planning on his truck, and it was the most comfortable conversation I had had with my father in years. Not because the big things were resolved, because we had both agreed, without saying so, to set them down for a few minutes and just talk. Tyler got a job, a real one, not the kind his parents found for him, or the kind where someone made a call on his behalf. He answered a posting online for a project coordinator position at a mid-size logistics company in Phoenix, and he went through 4 rounds of interviews, and he got it. He texted me on a Thursday morning at 8:03 and said, "Got the job." I texted back, "Good, you earned that one." He sent back a single thumbs-up emoji. That is the most emotionally direct communication Tyler and I have exchanged in possibly our entire adult lives. Marcus and I have met with Leonard Pratt 3 times in the past 8 months to work through the mechanics of the trust going forward, its management, its investment structure, its distribution provisions as Margaret grows. Leonard is methodical and patient and speaks about Harold in the present tense sometimes, which I notice and appreciate more than I can say. The trust is healthy. Margaret is healthy. She is 8 months old now and has Harold's eyes, the gray-green ones, the observant ones. And when she looks at me with those eyes, I feel seen in the specific way that Harold always made me feel seen, and I understand, in those moments, exactly why he built what he built and exactly who he built it for. There is something I want to say directly to you, if you are watching this, and you recognize any part of the architecture of this family. If you are the hallway, if you are the one whose needs learned very early to wait, who learned to manage on your own because management was never offered, who learned to call for help and then make peace with the silence, who learned to see clearly because no one was seeing you, and the habit of seeing became your survival. I want you to know that the people who love you in the particular, unhurried way that Harold loved me are not always the loudest people in the room. They are sometimes the ones sitting at the workbench, watching, taking the long view, making the kind of quiet decision that takes effect after they are gone. That love is not less than the loud kind. In some ways it is considerably more. It is love that builds a structure. It is love that says, "I see what this will become, and I am going to make sure you are protected from it." Harold saw me clearly. He saw me clearly when I was 8 years old, and nobody was taking me to baseball practice because my brother's baseball practice was already on the calendar. He saw me clearly when I was 17 and working a part-time job to fund my own school supplies. He saw me clearly when I sat beside his hospital bed in the spring of his last good year and held his hand and asked him nothing about money and nothing about the future and nothing about what he was going to do about any of it. Just sat there and held his hand and talked to him about the creek behind his old house in New Mexico and the particular quality of light in that valley in October, which he said he still thought about. He was watching me the whole time, he was making his plan, and when the moment arrived, the moment my daughter was born, and the cord was wrapped around her neck and the nurse held my hand in the operating room, Margaret Dutton Calloway already had everything she would ever need. Her great-grandfather had made sure of that, in silence, in advance, with the precision of an engineer who understood load-bearing structures and had decided, long ago, where the weight should go. I think about that often. I think about it when I am sitting in the nursery at 2 in the morning and Margaret is finally asleep and the house is quiet and I have a moment to look at her face in the blue monitor light. I think, Harold built this. He built this before I knew it needed to be built, and that is the kind of foresight that I intend to spend the rest of my life being equal to. Not in money, in seeing. In the particular act of looking at a person clearly, without the distortion of what you need them to be, and doing the quiet, difficult work of making sure they are protected and provided for, regardless of what the rest of the room decides. My name is Serena Calloway. I am 34 years old. My daughter is 8 months old, and her name is Margaret, after the man who loved us both before she existed. My parents are working through things in the slow, imperfect way that families work through things. My brother is going to be all right. Marcus is putting Margaret to bed right now in the next room, and she is fighting it, per usual, because she has Harold's stubbornness too, which in this family we have decided to call determination. And I am sitting at my kitchen table, with my coffee going cold beside me, telling you the truth. Thank you, genuinely, for giving this story the time it required, for sitting with the parts of it that were uncomfortable, for recognizing whatever part of it you recognized. These stories are worth telling because they are real in the way that matters, not in their specific details, but in their emotional architecture. If this one found you at the right moment, then I am glad. Leave a comment and tell me. Who in your life has ever seen you clearly, the way Harold saw me? Not the person you expected. The one you maybe didn't see coming. Tell me about them. I want to know. Hit subscribe, because we have a story for every Tuesday morning and every late Friday night when you need to hear that the quiet ones always win in the end. I will see you in the next one.